Hi everyone, I'm back with a new video. So, for this week I thought I'd make a little watercolor tutorial, even though nobody asked for it. That's fine. So, here's just a little thing that I did for Chuya's birthday. It was on the 29th of April. I'm pretty damn late, but I was on vacation, so not much I could have done about that. So, I guess this video is just going to be about like general tips for watercoloring, and some of it will be sped up, so you won't see, like it won't be an hour long, so rest assured, although you probably could have told already by the length of this video, but that's fine. So, here I'm just going to give you like watercolor tips and you'll just see my process. So, this is a moleskin sketchbook, and the paper that you choose to watercolor on, or the paper that you choose to do any art really, it's really important. Your materials will react a certain way on them, and so the watercolors will react differently on this paper versus like the fancy ass Arches paper. So, your paper, it really depends on you. So, try a bunch of papers out, see what you like the best. This paper I actually really like. It doesn't buckle too bad. Let me just pull up a couple things over here. So here's a couple, like it holds up pretty well. So I'm just going to give you guys a little tutorial. So this is lined with Copic multiliners, and when you're doing any watercolor piece, you really want to make sure that the pen or ink that you're using is waterproof. And this means that when you apply water onto it, it won't smudge the ink everywhere. And trust me, I've made the mistake of not using waterproof ink, and trust me, it's noticeable. So, Copic multiliner is what I use to outline this. And so, let's get started. So, to start, I'm going to take this binder clip and I'm going to clip my pages down. And so when I do that, this is just for the sketchbook so the paper doesn't, you know, fold. And when you watercolor, you want to have, oh sorry, the camera's a little tilted. When you watercolor, you want to have water, obviously, watercolor, and a brush that you're comfortable with. Where did my brush go? Here it is, okay. So you want to have a brush that you're comfortable with. Okay, so this brush is kind of chipping away everywhere, which, pro tip, don't leave your brushes in the water like overnight or even for a couple hours, because this will start to happen. I think it's because the like wood is expanding or something, and so because it's absorbing the water and then the paint is chipping off. So don't be like me. Don't leave your brushes in this friggin' water, okay? Okay, glad we talked. So anyways, you want to get a brush that you're comfortable with. This is the Winsor Newton Cotman brush. It's my favorite. You can check that out in my go-to art supplies video. So now on to the actual watercoloring. When I watercolor, I generally like to start with the skin, and this is because you can get like a really nice shadow on the skin without having the hair colored in or anything that's like intersecting with the skin, because when there's like a darker color here, if you go over it with like the skin tone, it's gonna like drag this dark color into it, and you don't want that. And so with watercolor, there's two techniques that are mostly used. One of them is wet on wet, and another one is, well, okay, I'll explain what that means. So wet on wet is basically you wet the whole surface, and you also, like, you don't wait for it to dry, and you just go in with another color. When you do that, it creates a soft gradient, and usually the colors turn out really light when you do that. And then another one is where you wet the surface, get like a base down, and then do like wet on dry. I like doing wet on dry because I can't really control things with wet on wet. Like, I don't really like the gradients, especially on this paper. It's kind of sucky. But if you have good paper, then that's not a problem. But so yeah, this one is going to be wet on dry mostly. I'll tell you when I'm gonna do wet on wet, and that will probably be for like blush, although I don't think I'm gonna have Chuya really blushing much, if at all, in this, but I'll let you know. So, yeah, I guess I'll get started. So for skin, that was an awful sound, I apologize. On this palette, you'll see here, this is the Sakura Watercolor Pocket Field Sketch Box. It actually comes with a skin tone pre-made. It's this one. And so you can also make your own skin tone with, like usually mixing your own colors is better than choosing like a pre-made thing here. But for time's sake, I'm just going to use a pre-made skin tone. And also, I don't think this pre-made skin tone is too bad. But you can mix your own. You want to make a really diluted orange. And so you would take red and yellow, mix them up. Or you can choose this orange, but like I said, mixing your own is better. And so the way that I watercolor is I use the white of the paper to be my light, and I work from light to dark. And so that means, as you can tell, I have not touched my white once. I've never used the white. I don't really know what happens when you use it. Maybe one day I'll use it, but I've just heard that when you add white, it makes the watercolor really opaque, and I don't want that. And so I stay away from white, but you can try it if you want, go for it. And so what I do is I take this and I dilute it. You can see I already have that there, so I'm just going to start with that. And there's several ways that you can go about this. You can wet the surface of the skin first and get it like really wet, and then the color will go on easier, or you can just do it how I'm doing, which is I'm just gonna take the skin right onto it. So as you can see, I just took my water and I wet this. You can have a test piece of paper like over here to test it. You know, see what color that's gonna be. I think that's fine, and now that's a little wet corner, but that's fine. So basically, it's pretty self-explanatory. You watercolor. And so the way that I watercolor, like I explained, is I just add like a base tone over everything. So like right now, I'm just applying this over all the skin that is visible. And if you want to do like darker skin tones, there's some pre-made browns over here. I don't color a lot of dark skinned or like dark tones, and so I'm not really the best person to ask about that, but just find a, like, mixing your colors with watercolors is super easy. So just experiment with it, try it on a scrap piece of paper, experiment with the different kinds of shading you can get from them, and you should be good. Alright, so now that I have the base of the skin done, it's going to take a while to dry. So what I'm now going to do is move on to different parts that are not touching this wet part of the skin. I cannot stress this enough. Do not say color this collar. Do not color the eyes. I have made that mistake so many times. Do not color areas that are touching other wet areas unless you want them to bleed into each other. So I think for now I will go into coloring the hat. So for that, I'm just going to grab a black. These two are blacks, I believe. So I kind of want it to be a little bit bluish, so I'm going to mix it with this blue that I already have here. And I'm just gonna grab a bunch of black and just go for it. And so with black, you want to be super careful because the black with watercolors is super potent. It's super concentrated unless of course you dilute it, but basically the black is super intense. So I wanted a sort of really dark black because his hat is supposed to be black. And I'm going to add a bit of blue lighting. So when I do this, I'm going to gradient it. Let's say I'm gonna pick my light source. I'm gonna have the light source coming this way. So that means that light will be hitting it over here and probably a little bit in the back over here. So I'm just gonna move this clip out of the way. And so, oh, another thing that I should have mentioned is that you should have a cloth with you. This will help you clean off your brush, and if little accidents happen, you can go and like dab at it, and it'll fix your problems. So as you can see, the black that I've mixed is super dark, but once I go about spreading this around, it'll look a little better. So I'm just laying in the black, and I'm going, as I said, to gradient this into like a blue. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little gradient. So let's do it in this little dish right over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix. It's gonna have to be a fairly dark blue since so as you can see, when I mix colors, I'm gonna want to work a little fast here since I don't want this edge to dry. So let's see if this works. That might be a little too blue. If it is, then I'll just I can fix it. So we have that, and I'm gonna grab a little bit of the black and try to blend that in. As you can see, the watercolors, this is the wet on wet technique I was speaking about earlier. The black is now merging in with the blue that I laid down, so these are going to like gradient into each other, and so you get a really nice gradient if you're good at it. Alright. Something like that, and then you can go back with more pigment. I want to make it a little darker. I'm just going to go back with a little bit more pigment. Make that transition a little smoother. So yeah, this is the wet on wet. As you can see, it can be a little temperamental. It can be a little hard to control, but with some practice, you're able to get some nice gradients like that. Let's see if I can, like, I want to tilt it so to show you the gradient that I achieved there. So now I'm going to try to do the same on the other side.
So here I'm just making this wet again because I didn't just ever let it dry. So now I'm mixing a dark blue, and I'm going to run it with that super blue. And voila. Get that to gradient there. And it looks nice like that. So as you can see, it's super simple
to get gradients with watercolor, and it's really easy to get gradients with colors that don't really belong together, I should say. I would say. So like if you're doing this with Copics, it would be a little bit more difficult, but with watercolor it all just sort of bleeds together. So now I'm gonna do the top of, I mean not the top, the rim of his hat.
So I'm super slowly. Taking my time. Just taking time. And as you can see, I didn't go in and do his ribbon here. Because if I did that, it would be touching the black and it would just bleed into an ugly mess. So, and I want to have a little bit of a highlight right here. So I'm going to skip that area. Alright, so now the rims are of his hat. I hope you can see the colors, the white.
Like, I hope the white isn't making it glisten too bad, but when it dries, you should be able to see. So, now let's test the skin. Yep, the skin feels pretty nice and dry. So now I can start working on shading it. And so, for shading the skin, if you're doing really pale skin like Chuyas, what I do is I mix like a purpley kind of a color, and then I I dilute it a ton. It should look a little something like sort of like the EO4. Is that what it is in Copics? There's like an EO4, and it's sort of like this color. So I'm taking like a violet and a red. This is gonna produce a lot of it because I need to dilute it a bunch, but now I'm diluting it, and I don't know if I explained this earlier. If I didn't, then I'm an awful human being. But now I'm just gonna take a little bit of the skin color, add it to it. But with watercolors, the more water you have, the more light the color is going to be. The less water you have when you go and grab the color from these little pots, the more saturated the color is going to be. Like greens are going to be like super green, yellow is going to be super bright and yellow, stuff like that. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like, I'm gonna have to add a lot of water to this if I want it to be diluted. Okay, let me add just a tiny bit of brown to it. Dilute it a tiny bit more. Alright, let's give this what I mixed a go. So, the skin. Oops, see? You just saw me do a bad boo-boo. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna try to save this. So you're going to see me using the scrape technique live. So what you want to do with the scrape technique is get a brush that has a little bit of water on it and just scrape out this color. And you'll see it starts erasing. The only problem is that with this paper, it's going to start to flake the paper. So be very careful with how much you're using the scrape technique, because you could just scrape a hole right through the paper. Yep, it's starting to pick up little bits of the paper, so that's bad. You don't want that. And bam! It's erased. So let's get back into the skin, shall we? Alright, so light source is coming this way. I need to remember not to touch this area. So that means shadows are going to be under here. There's his nose. Alright, and that's pretty much all I do with skin. Later I can go back and add like a super dark, or not super dark, but a darker shadow to this here. So later I can go back and do that. I won't want to do it now because as you can see, it would go up onto his actual face instead of the bottom of his neck. So I'm going to wait for that to dry to do that. And so now I think I'm going to go to his coat, and yeah, and then after that I'll probably move on to the hair. So yeah, that's basically all I really do for watercolor. Like, I guess the main tips I have are, 1, be sure to know where your wets are. Know which part is wet, how wet it is, and be sure to avoid it unless if you want the gradient effect. Number 2, I'd say, is beware of where you're resting your hand. As you can see, like what happened over here, I wasn't really thinking about it and my hand went through it. Number 3, did I say 3? You know what, let's just go with 3. Number 3, know your techniques. Know your scraping, know your wet on wet, your wet on dry, know how your paper reacts with it. Just know all of those things. Get really get really acquainted with your paper. You know, take it out for a couple of drinks, maybe for dinner. Really get to know it, know how it behaves, how it reacts to your paint. And that's pretty much it. Like, I'd say experiment with lighting, experiment with shadows, see how dark you can get your shadows to be, because I know that a lot of people struggle with getting in their shadows, like making sure that their darks are really dark. Although there's a really nice style, and I actually do it quite often, is where you make the colors really pastel-y with not a lot of harsh shadows. That can be a really nice style as well. So yeah, just experiment with all those things that I said and you're good to go. So I guess now I'll just kick the rest of this into time-lapse and just finish off this little doodle, and that will be it, and I guess I will see you in my next video.